Hey, I want to thank you for joining me. We're doing this every day, a different story from my life on the radio, due to the fact that I'm celebrating in March of 2022, the 50th year of my beginnings in radio. I started in 1972 in March, and of course that makes us 50 years later. And I wanted to do 30 days of, or 31 days of 30 different stories of my life on the radio, things that I thought might be kind of interesting. And if you listen to yesterday's or the previous one, you'll see, kind of figure out what kind of stories I'm telling here, just things that happened to me. And today I want to talk about my first real job. You heard about my first job, which I never got paid for. It only lasted one day and I walked out. But my first real job took place about a week later in Prescott, Arizona, middle of March or so of 1972. And I rolled into town in my Volkswagen bus, because that's what I had. I came down out of Flagstaff, Arizona, which is another story, and Holbrook and all that. I'll tell at a different time. But so I rolled into Prescott, Arizona, which was a small town, medium-sized town. I don't even know how many people were there at the time. But there was two radio stations, KCYA and KNOT. Sort of not radio, but so I went to KCYA first, and I walked in. I met the general manager, and I forget his name at the moment, but he said, "Yeah, come on in." Well, not too many people come through looking for jobs, and he sat me down in his office, and he said, "Yeah, I'd like to hire you. You're a nice young man, and you're clean cut, and I think I do need somebody to do some air work around here." And we went through all the things that I was going to have to do, and I was going to do some air work on weekends and the whole thing. And then he looked at me and he said, "Oh, there's one other thing." He basically offered me the job, and I said, "Yeah, okay." And he said, "There's one other thing. The person you're going to be replacing also empties the trash cans every night and cleans the restrooms." And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, not me." He said, "Well, you're going to be on the air and everything, and you're going to be doing everything." And I said, "Yeah, but my first job in radio, I really kind of wanted it to be more in radio and not as a janitor." He goes, "Well, that's the job, and I said, "Well, sorry, I'm going to pass." So I actually turned down my first real offer of a job in radio, which I never thought I'd do, but I did. And I drove across town and down on Main Street, and right down from the center square, which Prescott is a beautiful city. It really is cool. It's known for having as many bars as it has churches, like 50 or each or so. A real Wild West town at one time. And so I went into KNOT radio, and there I met the young lady at the front desk. Her name was Casey, and the assistant manager, an older woman by the name of Ruth. And I told her I was looking for a job, and she said, "Oh, well, yeah, you'd have to talk to the general manager. You have a tape." And I said, "Yeah, of course I have a tape." And so I handed her a 3-inch tape. She goes, "Well, it all depends on how the tape sounds." And I said, "Okay." So she took the tape back to the general manager, whose name was Gary. I don't remember his last name at the moment, but his name was Gary. And so all of a sudden they called me back, and I met Gary. And Gary was huge. He was over 400 pounds. As it turns out, Gary was also the bouncer at the local Palomino Club where the country music acts played. And it came through town. It was very, very popular. And I was kind of intimidated by this 400-pound, 6'5" guy that looked more like a wrestler than a general manager. And he sat me down and we talked. It turns out he was one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. Very, very gentle guy. Of course, I never ran into him in a bar or anything like that either. And they hired me. They were going to put me on, I guess it was 8 to midnight. That's what it was. And I was going to be a disc jockey from 8 to midnight, and I was going to do 2 minutes of news every hour. And so I got to meet the program director, whose name was George Allen, and who was working an extra long shift because of this. And it turns out George wanted to hire anybody there was a warm body, because he was working more hours on the air than he wanted to. And a guy who was doing middays by the name of Ben. And eventually I met Don Jackson, who was the morning jock who moved on down to Phoenix at one time. And the evening guy who was the chief engineer and disc jockey, wanted to get off the air. He was not a disc jockey. He didn't had no qualms about it. His name was Rich Topolovich, and he went by the name the Great Topolovich. And he was just happy to see someone get hired because it was going to take him off the air and he could be what he normally was, and that was the chief engineer of the radio station. So this kind of went on. I met the sales manager, and whose name was Dick, and I don't remember much more about him, except he was kind of an older guy and had some kids, and wasn't making much money. But they hired me for $2 an hour, and I was also had to sell. That was the deal. I had to be a salesman as well, and so I got like 15 or 20% of whatever I sold. And I had never sold radio time before in my life, but that was the main thing they really wanted me to do, and then fill in on the air overnight. And I would also do a 6-hour or a weekend shift. I'd be in for 6 hours, but I think I actually did 4 on the air. So I got my training, and it was kind of fun. Did some production, got to go out with a salesman, learn a little bit about the accounts. They gave me a trade for gasoline, so I didn't have to pay for gasoline, and which my Volkswagen bus. I think I got like I traded for $50 a month or $30 a month, and I never used more than like 1 tank of gas, and the whole time for a whole month. And it was just, but I got to be on the air, and I got to play disc jockey, and I got to play some sort of contemporary music, not rock and roll, but some contemporary music along with a little bit of country music. And I was there about a week, and my initiation night came, and I had no idea that this was happening. And Ben and the program director, George Allen, had been out drinking, which George did a lot of. George was an alcoholic. And so I was on the air, and I was getting ready to read my news, which is 2 minutes at the top of the hour. We didn't have a network or anything. I just had to go back and rip the wire, and the headlines and that kind of stuff. And so I got back to my chair, and Ben said, "Oh, I wanted to write you some news." Okay. So he wrote me something. He says, "You got to read this." And as I'm reading this on the air, a lot of the words have been changed. The word truck had been changed, and the word shot had been changed. And these are all words that he wrote in a piece of copy that he adapted really quickly. And fortunately, I caught those. But what I didn't catch was, as I'm reading, Ben is behind me pulling my chair backwards. And I'm going like this, trying to, and I had to stand up reading the newscast, and he's pulling it away. And fortunately, they didn't light my copy on fire. But they weren't able to break me up. That was the whole goal. The whole goal was just to make me laugh on the air, right? And George decided he was going to make sure I laughed. And we had this big glass window, studio window that looked out into the office, and then there was another big window that looked out onto the street. So actually I could see out onto the street through the front office. And as I'm reading, George gets a chair on the other side of the glass and stands up, and George stands up to where his belt buckle is eye level to me, and he unzips his pants, puts his hand down and sticks his finger out and wiggles his finger, and I lost it. It was just, and they got me. I ended up laughing, and I quickly spun a record. It was the days when we had actual vinyl records, and it was like, and they started laughing, and they just left, and they left laughing. And turns out the next morning when I came in, Casey had a big smile on her face, and she said, "Your initiation was last night, right?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Don't worry, the whole town heard it." But that was one of the only time I was really ever initiated on the air was that time, and it was I guess it was worth every penny to them. So it went on. It was an interesting job. I was learning a lot. I took over the night shift, and then at some point we changed general managers. Jerry decided he didn't want to do this anymore, and the morning jock Don Jackson, who was also a real estate salesman and just worked 2 hours on the air in the morning, that became the general manager. And Ruth and I weren't getting along, the assistant manager. And I was a 18-year-old punk kid, and she was someone who had only been in a radio, knew nothing about radio, except when she walked in and got this bookkeeper's job, and through attrition became the assistant general manager. And somebody knew enough not to make her general manager. So Don decided that he was going to fire some of the individuals, George, and we had another disc jockey who still lives in Prescott, by the way, Bob Slim, who also went to Career Academy like me, but he went in New York. He was a New Yorker who came to Prescott and went by the name Robert B. Good. And he also, hung out with George a lot at the Palomino Club, and they'd go drinking and stuff. And Don really didn't fit the general manager's lifestyle and what he wanted, an image. So he fired them and cut the hours that I was on the air. I was going to be on the air from 7 to 10. And his son was a high school kid who wanted to desperately be in radio. And so he put him, Miles was his name, on the radio. I would do like from 5 to 7, and then Miles would go from 7 to 10. Then we'd go off the air. And I would be there to babysit because Miles didn't have a license and I did. And they would pay me for that. They gave me a raise to $2.50 an hour. So I was making money. Here I am, this 19-year-old kid. And I was actually making more money than the sales manager, which really hacked him off when he found that out. Not that I was making that much money, but that he wasn't making enough. And he went to Ruth and complained about it. And Ruth was just hot. I literally made more money than anybody in the radio station that month than the general manager. And just because I was working all these hours, and plus I was doing sales, which were good. And she came in to me while I was on the air. And that's something never should happen. The general manager, program director, or they're going to yell at you or whatever. They should never do it when you're on the air, because it just changes the whole mood of you, and you have to do the rest of your show, right? So she comes in, and she is just hot under the collar. And she looks at me and she goes, "Don't you ever tell anybody how much you make. That is your business. Don't." And she is just reading me the Riot Act. But the main thing she was saying was, "Don't you ever tell anybody how much money you make, what your salary is, or anything like that. That's your business and your business alone." I looked at her and I wasn't happy, but I smiled at her. I said, "Ruth, you're right. You're absolutely right." She looked at me like, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, it absolutely is my business. And I'll tell anyone I damn well please how much I make." And she got really angry, stormed out, and needless to say, I didn't last long after that. That was pretty much, I was there 4 months. And one day or so before my 4 months was up, or actually 2 days, I was on the air on the weekend. Now, at this point, I was the midday person during the week. I was on the air from like 10 to 2, and I was disc jockeying 10 to 2. And we started running promos that Ed Hinckley, who was the morning disc jockey at the other radio station and the other big personality along with Don Jackson in town. And we were running promos that Ed Hinckel was going to be on the air at KNOT Radio Prescott from 10 to 2, Monday through Friday, starting Monday. Well, that was my shift. And I'm playing these promos every 20 minutes on a 4-hour or 5-hour weekend shift that I was doing. And nobody told me, and there wasn't anybody that I could call. And so I just kind of, a couple of times on the air, said, "Well, I think I'll be around here somewhere." That's my shift, and Ed's going to be taking my shift. So I don't know where I'll be, but, and Casey told me later, she goes, it was so sad. She almost cried that, here I was kind of floundering, and nobody had told me. Again, I'm 19 years old. I'm really impressionable, but, nobody had told me what was going to happen. So Monday morning, we have a staff meeting, 9 o'clock. We're all bright and early. And I had been doing sports. I had sold some weekend softball play-by-play. Prescott is the home of some of the best men's fast-pitch softball in the country. They have tournaments there, and a lot of local teams that play on the weekend. And some brothers of Major League Baseball players, John Denny, the pitcher for the Cardinals and Phillies, his brothers, he's from Prescott, and they were pretty big players in town. And I sold advertising for it, and then I did play-by-play. Every Saturday night I did play-by-play, and it was great because that's really the only reason I really got into the radio, what I wanted to do. And so we have this meeting, and Ed is introduced as the new general manager, and his big thing is we're going to have a new slogan. K-Not. We say, why not? Okay. Oh, powerful stuff there. And so he said, I'll answer any questions. But he never addressed me or anything. And so I raised my hand at the end of the meeting, and I said, Ed, I'm normally on the air 10 to 2, and I know we ran promos all weekend that you're going to be on the air 10 to 2. Where does that leave me? Well, you're going to be the first one in my office. And I said, okay. So I walked back to his office with him, and he said, no air work. You can still do your play-by-play on the weekends. I'll pay you something to do some sportscasts because I know you like sports. And I was writing for the local newspaper. I was writing for the Prescott Courier, not a non-paid position. I was writing 2 sports columns a week, just opinion columns on Major League Sports. And he said, you can still do that. Do they pay you? And I said, no. He said, well, maybe you should find out, and maybe you get paid. And I said, okay. And he said, but no air work. And I said, what do you mean no air work? None at all. He goes, no. And I said, how come? He goes, well, because I don't want you on the air. And I said, okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to pay me $2.50 an hour for my sportscast every day, which is basically 5 minutes or 2 minutes, and then pay me for 3 or 4 hours on the weekend on Saturday. So $10, and maybe $20 a week. And then my sales based on when collections come in. And he says, yeah. Oh, you can keep your trade for gasoline. And I said, okay. So I'm making, $40 a week? And he's, yeah, probably, and where I live is a Hotel Vendome down the street, which is 1 room at $65 a month. And I share a bathroom down the hall with somebody I'd never see. And I said, well, I have no qualms about going back to California. And he goes, okay. I said, can I double off some of the production I've done? And he says, yeah, I'll have somebody sit in with you tonight. And I said, okay. Went out, kind of said my goodbyes, and drove back to California that night. And that was the end of my first job. I was there 4 months, and it was a learning experience. 3 days later or so, I got a job as a studio engineer and part-time announcer at KVFM in the San Fernando Valley FM station, and I got $1.60 an hour. That was my welcome to LA. A year before, I'd been working at Country Cousins Market until the earthquake, as a box boy, making $1.65 an hour. So I was making a nickel less, but hey, I was a star on LA radio, right? Or hopefully at some day I would be. But so that's the second story I wanted to tell you. And it was, like I said, it was a learning experience, and it was my first job and something I'll never forget. And I have since gone back to Prescott several times, and went there for a book signing and a lot of other things. And it's a great town. And I've always wondered whatever happened to all those people. There are more stories about life on the radio in Prescott, Arizona that I'll tell you down the road. But that's it for today. Join me next time, and we'll have another story for you.